Good evening. My name is Brian Rushi, and I am presenting my master's thesis for LED 699 at Colorado Christian University. The title of my thesis is Understanding the Plight of the Homeless, a Community Praxis Study. And I begin with the question, what if you find yourself homeless? How would you manage to take care of your day-to-day needs in a condition of homelessness? What is it that the community, and more specifically, can Christians do to address the challenges of homelessness? Let's talk a little bit about that then. My community, Grand Junction, Colorado, has a significant ongoing issue with homelessness, one that's been described as a dilemma by the Daily Sentinel, our newspaper of record. A lot of this has to do with the perception of homelessness within our community, and it made me think of the question, is homelessness a personal problem with a community impact or a community problem with a personal impact? Tompkins notes that it is tempting to oversimplify homelessness in either of two directions. One is to blame the victim, making homelessness a symptom of weak character. The other is to make it all a matter of economics. So the problem statement leads me to the following research question regarding services that are available in our community for those that find themselves homeless. Are these services that are available, and more specifically the logistics of obtaining these services, a barrier to the homeless who are striving for self-sufficiency? My thesis is that the logistics of obtaining social services from individual agencies that are scattered throughout the community, primarily due to a lack of consistent transportation, can be a hindrance or a barrier to those seeking self-sufficiency. So why would I decide to undertake this study? One of the main reasons is to do some informed decision making. I have been a member of the board of directors for Homeward Bound of the Grand Valley, which is the largest homeless shelter between Denver and Salt Lake City. And as a board member, Worth notes that we have a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, and a duty of obedience to the organization. But more importantly than that, this study is to better understand the challenges faced by those who find themselves homeless. In Philippians 2, the Apostle Paul notes that we should do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than ourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. So what's the extent of the homelessness in our community and beyond? On a single night in 2017, 17 out of every 10,000 people in the United States of America were experiencing homelessness. That number is actually proportionally higher in the state of Colorado, according to what's known as the Point in Time survey conducted in January of 2017. In our local context then, who are the homeless? According to an editorial by Joyce, the vast majority of our clients, these are at Homeward Bound, are members of our community, and they're all facing difficult situations. Amster notes that homelessness itself is really a condition and more than a personal attribute. In reviewing the literature as preparation for this master's thesis, I discovered a few themes. One is that transportation emerges as critical to escaping poverty. This was a study done in and featured in the New York Times. Mobility is recognized as to play a significant role in anyone's well-being. The second reference is a study that was done in the Greater Toronto area. However, the goal of homelessness ostensibly would be to obtain housing. And unfortunately, the United States Supreme Court has declared that housing is not fit within our constitutional rights. There was a case in 1972 that's still being used as precedent in regards to what the Constitution says around the issue of housing. Lastly, I came upon a very recent doctoral study in a similar community in western South Dakota focusing on the idea of an intentional community, kind of like the idea of a the sharing economy, as having some potential to be a way to mitigate homelessness, putting people in a different context than simply finding them individual homes, but creating more of a community. And so with that, I undertook to conduct a multi-method praxis study to integrate the metadata analysis as well as a quasi-experimental questionnaire. These inform the deductive ethic of my work and personal observations from being on the board and volunteering with the organization to inform the inductive emic. Really what we're looking at here is the idea of theory applied to a problem of practice, according to Smith. My paper will use the narrative style to communicate the learning. And this actual survey was conducted on April 9th with opt-in anonymous individuals, those that chose to participate in a very informal way on the evening of April 9th at the facility homeward bound in the Grand Valley. So a questionnaire was developed, and these are a quick take on the results of that questionnaire, all of which is included in the accompanying thesis document. As far as homelessness goes, for many people it's an on and off condition. The reports were either from 2 days to 2 months being homeless, but the reality is that these folks that I surveyed anyway experienced homelessness on an off and on basis as their circumstances changed. Interestingly enough, a few of the folks were actually on parole from the Department of Corrections, and so obviously during the time that they were incarcerated, that was they weren't considered homeless, but they were certainly not self-sufficient. With respect to community services, there are many community services that are available in our community, but about half of the folks experienced that they were not really helpful in terms of moving them down the road of sustainability or of self-sufficiency. The real crux of my work had to do with transportation, and this was not really a surprise, but sort of to be expected actually, that many of them have only one way of getting around, and that's their own 2 feet. And so that does make access to services difficult when we're talking about walking miles throughout the day. Others, however, reported that that's sort of with the territory, and they didn't seem very concerned about the walking, but there were many circumstances that led people to, forced people to rely on their own 2 feet for transportation rather than public transit or even personal vehicles. One other element of this study had to do with communication, specifically the idea of a mobile device. While many of the folks, 2/3 of them, had a mobile device, most of them rely on the free Wi-Fi that's available at public businesses and don't actually have a plan, if you will, or a way to make good use out of that technology. And then some qualitative questions were asked regarding their biggest challenges. Many of the things that those of us with homes would take for granted is being able to do laundry whenever we wanted within our own home, and that is not possible for those that are homeless. It's expensive and it's heavy. That was quite a surprise, actually. And also the general idea of freedom of movement. While freedom of movement is not actually technically restricted, there is this sense that you have to watch the clock, and there are certain times when you must check into the shelter and certain times when you must check out, and certain times when other businesses open and when they close, such as the library, that really plan their whole day around the clock and to ensure that they have a place to stay when the evening comes. And lastly, just a broad question of what do you hope for? Best characterized in 2 words: self-determination. Not being in this situation, not being homeless any longer, and being able to dictate their own direction for their lives, even as they acknowledge that some of the choices that were made in the past may have led to the situation that they're in. As far as applying this research then, this is praxis research. The goal of all programs then should be to move the need of move from a need base to self-sustainability, and many organizations work toward that goal. Nonprofit organizations within and outside the community typically fill gaps that are left by the market and government failure. This idea that there just aren't enough jobs and isn't enough income for people to be able to do it on their own. Did have the opportunity to share this research with the new executive director of Homeward Bound, the organization for which I am a board member, and he's already undertaken the steps to do some organizational culture and some organizational change that, according to Burke, would help support the mission and strategy. And the real takeaway from that is framing everything, both the actual services as well as the actions of the organization, from a mindset of surviving to a mindset of thriving. From surviving to thriving is the tagline. So lastly, I just want to leave this presentation with one of the core values that is of Homeward Bound that I share, that those of us who are Christians also share, in terms of how we are to take care of the least of these among us. And that is that the value of a person is not measured by his or her situation, but by the very fact that they are a human being. I thank you for the opportunity to have put together this master's thesis and for the opportunity to summarize it here on my YouTube channel. This represents a conclusion of the capstone project, as well as the conclusion of my work toward a Master's of Organizational Leadership degree at Colorado Christian University. Thank you very much.